Georgy Jamieson's Big Night In on BBC Radio Suffolk.
So it's time to be in conversation, and tonight I am delighted to be in conversation with Phil Harding, a record producer, originally working and living in London, but now being with us here in Suffolk, just outside Bury St Edmunds. How many years, Phil, have you been Suffolkised?
Yeah, we've been up here since 1987.
Oh, that's a good long while. That's a good long while. You're nearly local.
Originally walked on the Willows, and 6 years ago we moved into Bury St Edmunds itself. So, we've had a wonderful time here in Suffolk and absolutely love it.
Now, I described you as a record producer, but that doesn't really encompass all that you've done because... Well, let's go back to the beginning then, Phil. Let's go back to 1973. Wow. Marquee Studios. I mean, I've got all sorts of bits of paper here with various things about you, articles, lists. I mean, the people that you've worked with is just a who's who of the record industry from the 70s, 80s and 90s, really, isn't it?
Especially 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
You know, I did my training at the Marquee Studios, as you say, 1973, seems a long time ago now. But in those days, there weren't really the kind of courses at colleges like we've got at West Suffolk College and University Studies at West Suffolk College and here at New College in Ipswich. You couldn't, so you learnt on the job. It was a sort of an unofficial apprenticeship, and ran around making the tea. Operated the tape machines, which were in a different room. You know, we weren't actually in the sort of white suits like you might classically see on some TV programs, but we were initially in separate rooms to where all the action was going on.
And this is splicing tape with razor blades and things,
splicing
isn't it?
tape, setting up the mics. But it was a fantastic learning curve for me, and fantastic people using the studio. One of my main mentors back then was Gus Studgeon, the producer of a lot of the classic Elton John stuff. And we mixed a lot of Elton John records there. And, David Bowie...
The Clash I've got down here.
The Clash, yes.
Killing Joke, Toya.
That's once I started engineering, yes, in the late 70s. And once that sort of punk revolution happened in the late 70s, I'd finished my training and was engineering. And it was quite incredible. Bands like The Clash, part of the punk ethos was we don't want to work with these old-time rock producers that have been doing all the, corporate rock from the early 70s and so on. That was part of the change of attitude. And they used to say to the record companies, well, just book us into a studio with a young engineer and we'll produce it. So it's quite a strange thing for young engineers like myself, because I'd spent 5 years watching where you've got bands out in the studio beyond the glass. Yeah. You've got the engineer at the desk, and you've got the producer sitting to their left like a film director running the operation. And there I was working with bands like The Clash and Killing Joke, and I've got an empty chair next to me.
And they're throwing the rule book out the window, aren't they?
And it was pretty chaotic, I can say that, but a fantastic learning curve, and especially The Clash, fantastic people. And
how exciting was punk? I mean, I was little. I didn't really. I was like 7, 8 years old, so I didn't get it. And now I listen to it and go, that just totally changed everything.
It was an exciting period, So a couple of guitars, drummer, singer that could sort of, shout it out.
Shout it out.
3 chords. A bit like people talk about country music now. 3 chords and the truth. You could relate that to punk in some ways. But by the time we got to Toya Wilcox, who I engineered, I was fully engineering and doing a little bit of co-production by then. And James Hazel played this morning, actually, her big hit, I Want to Be Free.
Yeah.
Which, that was the point where people started recognising me as an up-and-coming engineer, getting good results, having hits in the charts, and moving towards my sort of production goal.
So just explain to me, what's the difference between a record engineer and a record producer?
Easiest explanation is pretty much as I've already said. A record producer is like the film director, and an engineer is more like a technician on the film set. So it could be a camera person,
or sound engineer or something like that. Yeah.
So the engineer is generally not in charge. The producer's generally in charge with the artists and the engineer is serving both of those. But as I said, there's been a breed of sort of co-production creative engineers since the punk days, because the producer seat was left empty.
Yeah.
So even now, when you look at albums by bands like Coldplay and Kaiser Chiefs, generally the band are co-producing with a creative engineer that they're calling a co-producer.
Yeah.
So it has, you're quite right, it's got closer, that kind of definition between the two.
Yeah, because it's always, to a layman, you're like, it's always like the difference between a producer and a director in theatre. It's like, well, what does everybody do? Yeah. So you're in London, you're working with all these amazing bands. Were you brought up in London?
Romford in Essex.
Oh, right. So not far to get into the hub
far.
of it.
And eventually myself and my then partner Francis, my wife now Francis, moved into Bethnal Green. And it's strange, because we were both from families that were from London that moved out to Essex, and then there we were as the next generation moving back into East London. So we had a flat in Bethnal Green, and that led us to, when we were looking for somewhere to escape in the 80s, when I got super busy at PWL working with Stock Aitken Waterman. That's why we looked at Suffolk, because it's an easy, but it's the right side of London. Yeah. To get out. To get
out and get back in again and so forth. Yeah. Well, it brings us to the 80s. You worked with Stock Aitken and Waterman, who at the time, I think Pete Waterman said he wanted that brand to be like Motown.
Yeah.
He wanted that hit factory, and it was known as the Hit Factory, wasn't it?
It got nicknamed the Hit Factory because we were just turning out so many records and so many hits. But that was his dream and desire at the beginning in 1984. That record you just played, Dead or Alive, that was recorded and mixed at the Marquee. So there was a year of working while I was still a house engineer at the Marquee with Stock Aitken Waterman, and it was that record that was the turning point for Pete and the boys to say, right, we got a number one record.
Yeah, it was their first big number one, wasn't it?
First big number one for the team. Done a whole album with called Youthquake, which was clearly going to do well after that. With a major label, definitely money's going to come in. Time to start our own studio. So we shifted from the Marquee, which is in Soho, and Pete found premises in South London in an area called Borough, an old sort of electric power station that had been partly already converted to a studio, and took over the whole building. Started with one studio. I had to go freelance, as many other people did. Only one person was employed. And from 5 or 6 people, within 4 years, we had 4 studios in the building.
Wow.
Another building, 50 staff, record label, management company, publishing company. It was. I mean, the pace that it broke out after Dead or Alive was pretty astounding. And that's not to say that there were some, obviously, a few unsuccessful projects and records along the way, but people tend not to talk about those.
It's hard even to remember what they might have been, because the successes were literally, it was bang, bang, bang.
That's right.
Wasn't there at one point the entire top 10 were Stock Aitken and Waterman?
I think that's right, or certainly the top 3. Certainly in our peak year, I can remember going to a music business awards show, and the stats were that PWL Stock Aitken Waterman had generated 40% of that year's singles in the UK singles chart, and there were 2 American executives there, kind of looking at their staff, because by that time Pete had his own label, PWL Records, with Kylie on and Jason on. And the American executives were saying, how were we being beaten and outsold by this group of people running an independent label in South London?
How are they doing
What's going on?
So how was he doing it? I mean, the 3 of them, but I always felt Pete Waterman was the real driving force behind it all. Was that the
he
case?
Was. Excuse me. I've had time to reflect on all of this, and part of my journey now is that I was offered to do a doctorate up at Leeds Beckett University about 5 years ago, and they've allowed me to reflect back, not so much on the 80s, because I've already got this wonderful book out.
You have, and we'll talk about the book later
in for
on.
you, PWL from the Factory Floor, that's called. But the start of what is going to become my second book and was my doctorate was to reflect on what happened at PWL in the 80s, and then what I went on to in the 90s. And from that kind of research and reflection, I've now kind of put into almost academic type boxes as to who did what and what do we call a Pete Waterman, what do we call an entrepreneur like that, and same with Berry Gordy that ran Tamla Motown.
Yeah.
Well, we're calling them team leaders. They're the team leader of a creative and commercial service model, and I don't know, obviously, if it was exactly the same with Berry Gordy, but we had a situation with Pete Waterman where basically from 84 through to 91, 92, nothing came into the building or left the building in terms of projects or records or anything that he didn't approve. So you couldn't sneak anything in and out of the studio. It was very much, he brought the work in. He was fantastic as an entrepreneur, liaising with the clients, fantastic at driving the creative team, and then fantastic at selling the final product back to the client. Mm-hmm. And that whole chain is kind of what I call a service chain, where you take the business requirement, match it with the creative requirements, make it happen creatively in a novel way, and then it becomes a commercial product.
Were you making the kind of music you like to listen to at home?
Oh, that's a good question, Georgie. I've often said to that sort of question, and there's two aspects to it, but probably the only thing that I did in that period, in the 80s and into the early 90s, that I would listen to at home was an act called Basher, who used to be the female singer in Matt Bianco.
Oh, right, yes.
And it was quite a sort of laid-back Latin jazz pop, and she had two very successful albums in America. But the other side of it, Georgie, is that you spend so long on one song. For instance, yeah. I'm mixing a song at the moment this week for an American artist, and it's just an extended club-type 80s remix for him. But I must have spent so far this week the best part of 30 hours plus on one 3-minute song. 30
hours on one 3-minute song?
So far.
So you're not going to want to listen to that for pleasure, are you?
Exactly, because you've broken it down creatively, technically, every way possible. And it was the same with the fantastic run of E17 records we had in the 90s. The last thing you'd want to do, unfortunately, as a producer or an engineer, is put your own record on.
Yeah, you weren't going to get back in your car and stick a CD and listen to it, were you?
The pleasure from that is it's seeing it, hearing it being played on the radio. Yeah. That's a great buzz when you've been that closely involved in a record, and then if people appreciate it and it climbs the charts. But when I going back to 1973 where we started, I was listening to Deep Purple and the Groundhogs and all these heavy rock acts, thinking, oh, if I could get in a rock studio or get into a recording studio and be working on the sort of music that I love, fantastic. But I went on a pop journey, and I always liked pop music anyway. But probably back then my favourite was rock, and I did do quite a bit of rock in the late 70s, and even now we're going to play a couple of rock tracks later on.
We are going to play a couple of things you've been working on more recently.
So I've kind of gone back to it, but I had a 20 plus year of out and out pop. Thoroughly enjoyed it, but no, wouldn't go home and listen to it.
Go home and listen to it.
A very long answer to a very simple question. Sorry, Georgie.
No, it's fine. Did you always want to work in the record industry? I mean, when you were at school, was it something you fell into, or was it an absolute ambition?
I'd say from about 14, when I started taking piano lessons with the music teacher at school. That's when I got bitten by the bug, and the thought of the possibility of actually, could I work in an industry that I'll really enjoy? And so I said to the careers officer at my school in Dagenham, I don't want to stay on for A-levels. I left at 16, even though I was being encouraged to stay on. And I said I'd really like to find some sort of job in the music industry if I can. And I've been one of those people that, and I think a lot of people in the creative industry say this, you need a lucky break somewhere. Certainly initially, but then probably along your creative
further
journey.
Down the line. Did you get told, record industry, you got to get a proper job?
Yeah, well, I got sent to an early video making studio, and then I got sent to, at least the careers officer sent me to some interviews.
That's true.
And they were both in London. And the second one was someone that manufactured all the sort of cables and plugs that we use in studios.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm surrounded by bits
here.
Of plug and cable and wires and all sorts. Yeah.
And they said to me, we're not sure if you're the engineering technical sort of person that we want, but we hear in the studio behind us, which was the Marquee, that they're looking for a new assistant. Here's the manager's phone number.
Wow. So it was right place, right time.
Yeah. Went home, phoned the number, went back to London, got the interview the next day, got the job. I mean, you couldn't make it up.
No.
You couldn't do that now because we've got all these wonderful college and university courses, which are the journey into the industry now. And that's how it was for me, yeah. And probably my next big gut instinct, that's what I call it, where you try to find your element about what you want to what you want to be doing, and how you're going to enjoy your work, which I'm sure you do here as well.
Yeah.
Was being persuaded by Pete Waterman and Stock Aitken Waterman to leave a salaried job at the Marquee, become freelance. No idea how much work is going to come in and join their team. And I just, a bit like you're saying, this overwhelming desire. I didn't necessarily have that at 14, but at the point where I was made that offer by them, it was absolutely, regardless of money, this is something I definitely feel I've got to do. And it was the right decision. So everybody needs that bit of luck that actors and musicians talk about. But also you've got to be ready to make that decision when the moment comes. And often it's a big life-changing decision. Which
it obviously was for you going to work with Stock Aitken and Waterman. We're going to have a bit of music and then I will be back with my In Conversation guest, Phil Harding, record producer. We just talked about Stock Aitken and Waterman. This was one of their biggest hits, and probably unexpectedly so, because no one knew at the time that she was going to end up being the superstar that she is. And we'll hear the story behind it after Kylie Minogue and I Should Be So Lucky here on BBC Radio Suffolk. Kylie Minogue and her first big hit, I Should Be So Lucky. It was produced by Stock Aitken and Waterman. And my In Conversation guest is record producer Phil Harding. He worked with Stock Aitken and Waterman, the Hit Factory, as they were known in the 80s.
Yes, that's what it got nicknamed, yes. Absolutely.
Because it was, literally. I mean, there's a great story behind that. When we saw Kylie in Neighbours and she was Charlene and no one knew. I think in Australia, I think they knew that she could sing because she'd been a child star with her sister Danny, and they had sung on Junior Showtime, I think it was.
That's right.
But over here, it was like Australian soap stars, and it kind of opened this door. There was Jason, there was Craig McLachlan, there was Stefan. I mean, there was everybody. It was a huge Australian invasion. Tell the story about that particular song.
I mean, obviously, for the rest of us there at the studio, Neighbours was on at what, 5 o'clock?
It used to be lunchtime, and then they used to repeat it at 5:30.
We'd all be in the studio working.
This is it. You wouldn't
none
see
of
it,
us knew who Kylie was, what Neighbours was, but it was, as I've been talking about Pete, it was his job to sort of get out and find the kind of things that could work well with Stock Aitken Waterman and be something that he could commercialise. And he was approached by the people that had signed Kylie because with her sister and like a lot of these TV personalities, you know, she could sing. She'd had singing training as many people do and have done for a long time, go into a drama college or performing arts college or whatever, so they can turn their hand to that. So contracts were signed. She had in fact, one of our engineers had already gone out to Australia and made a version of Locomotion with her, and it had been a hit there. So then the decision was, well, we won't release that in the UK and around Europe. We'll come to London, make a fresh record with Stock Aitken Waterman, and take it from there. And Stock Aitken Waterman was so busy at that time in the studio with lists of, Banana Armour and
Rick Astley.
Rick Astley had probably moved on by then, but lots of other acts.
Mel and Kim, wasn't there?
Yeah.
I mean, there was tons of them.
And there's this. It's quite a famous story now, and there's a few versions of it. I'll keep it super brief. But basically, they brought her over to London for a week, and to get a week off of the filming of Neighbours was a major thing. They only got a week or two for a whole year. And it was underestimated by Pete, the importance of getting something done in that week. And he literally failed, for whatever reason, to pass over to Stock and Aitken, the main creators in the studio, that this Australian singer was here to make a record, and that they needed to write a song for her. And every day she would come into the building, wouldn't even meet Stock and Aitken, and would be sent off with Pete Waterman's driver to see the sights in London. And they kept stalling and stalling. And one late afternoon, we were having a birthday celebration in the reception area, and I briefly met Kylie, who was sitting shyly, because she's quite shy as a personality, sitting in the corner. No one was talking to her, and I went over and introduced myself and asked what she was doing here. And she explained that she's waiting to get into the studio. So finally, on the Friday, it became, she was flying back to Australia that evening, and it became a priority to get her into the studio. But still, Pete Waterman, as fantastic as I made him sound earlier, had failed to tell Stock and Aitken. So
there was no song.
So there was no song. Kylie's manager and the managing director of the label and PWL had to go into the studio Friday morning, explain the situation to Mike Stock and Matt Aitken, and say, you've just got to drop everything else and write a song today for Kylie. And in this conversation that goes on around this, one of the PR... This is as true as I think the story gets. Yeah. One of the PR guys comes in, and they're all debating it, and Mike Stock, or one of them, had said, well, we've got a few spare songs on the shelf there, maybe we should pull something off the shelf. And the PR guy, I wasn't in the room, but apparently said, oh, she should be so lucky to just have something that you've got sitting on the shelf. And it was like a light bulb moment, apparently, for Mike Stock. She should be so lucky, that's it. And the rest is history. They could write songs really fast.
But they were literally like writing 2 or 3 lines. She was recording them, then they'd write a little bit more. And
that's it.
To the point where she really kind of didn't know how the song fitted together.
She didn't hear a complete song when she walked out of the studio and rushed off to Heathrow.
But it was the launch of, literally one of the most amazingly global superstars ever. Kylie now is legendary.
Rick Astley's made a fantastic comeback in recent years. But she's lasted and lasted and lasted and become a pop icon. So it was a rocky beginning that almost didn't happen.
Briefly before we go on to the 90s, Simon Cowell was at PWL. What are your memories of Mr. Cowell?
Well, not many people say this side of it, and I'm quite happy and willing to, because I was there, and the studio that I was working in was on the same level as the reception, so you only had to sort of pop out the door and you could see, who was coming and going and what was going on, and a number of times I saw him getting kicked out by Pete.
Because he was making a nuisance of himself.
Because he was making a nuisance of himself, continually turning up, pushing them to do more work with Sunita and other artists he had on his label, and spending a lot of time there, as he says now, almost being mentored by Pete and following what was going on for his future. So, but at that time, to us, throughout the building, he was just a bit of an annoyance.
There's probably plenty of people going to be watching Britain's Got Talent this evening.
It's very strange to say that now, doesn't it?
May well agree with you.
Oh, well, yeah.
But yeah. I get, very much like Pete Waterman, this driving ambition, and look where he is now.
No, absolutely. He absolutely knew where he wanted to go, what he wanted to do. He started with a small label. He managed to then get a label within RCA BMG, and there was just no stopping him. At that time, we had no idea that he had ambitions for TV.
Maybe he didn't.
Maybe
himself,
he didn't know that. Maybe the offer came along,
and Pete as well. I mean, he was a judge on one of those very first one, Pop Idol, and Pop Stars.
But I mean, to sum it up on Simon, he's fantastic as a marketing person. You know, as I've described Pete Waterman as a team leader, a creative team driver. Simon Cowell had these fantastic ideas for marketing, and he's kind of got himself stuck into a bit of a difficult situation, I think, on TV, where everyone thinks he knows a lot about music, but actually he knows a lot about marketing. But for most musicians that would watch X Factor or Britain's Got Talent, the way he talks about music, you can quickly understand that he doesn't really... You know, he's not a musician. At least Pete was a bit of a...
Yeah, but he's a marketing man. He knows how to...
And marketing people talking about music is not always... certainly in the studio world, it's not always comfortable.
Why is that?
Well, because, and Simon would come into the studio. I mean, we did some records for him in the 90s, and you would kind of do everything you could to avoid having him visit the studio. Because...
Why?
Well, because he would
poke his nose in.
Yeah, but sometimes on a project you get to the point, well, you know, we've done 4 mixes or whatever, and you're still not happy, Simon. You better come down to the studio and actually, you know, tell us what you think it is that, and just, you know, I won't get too sort of mean or nasty, but sort of musicians would understand this. He'd say something like, "Well, what's that ticking in the left-hand side of the speaker, Phil?" Well, that's the hi-hat as part of the drum kit.
I see.
And he wouldn't know those technicalities of a full drum kit. And, you know, why does the piano sound so soft? Well, it's an electric piano sound rather than an acoustic piano sound. Would you like an acoustic piano sound? You know, it'd be things like that, and you'd think,
So he knew what would sell, but he didn't know that necessarily the technicals and the musicality behind it.
And he'd need teams, and he uses lots of different producers and musicians to achieve that, and has done well. But all of those people working for him probably understand, as I just said.
Yeah, they understand.
Don't try and get too much musical information out of him, because you'll be heading off on a road that you'd prefer not to be going down, you know.
Now, your days at...
I've said too much already there.
PWL are in a book. Tell us about that first book.
Yes, this has been out for some time. It's available on Amazon. PWL From the Factory Floor. And I wrote this because it's about 10 years ago now. Pete Waterman had written an autobiography and didn't really talk about the PWL story till at least 2/3 into the book. You know, spoke about his youth and all sorts of things that... you're thinking, well, when are we going to get to what we want to read about?
Yeah, we're going to get to the heart of it.
So then Mike Stock wrote a book called The Hit Factory, just about the studio. And both books were very much from the people at the top, as we've been talking, and their perspective. And my feeling after reading those 2 books were people that are interested in the workings of how records are made, how studios are set up and so on, might be interested in a different view from someone within the team rather than from people at the top of the team. So that's why I've called it From the Factory Floor. You know, as part of the team, I've got a different perspective and a different overview to what the other guys had, and it's gone down very well. And
there's a second book due out soon.
Yes, on the way. Thank you, Georgie.
Pop music production, manufactured pop and boy bands of the 90s.
Yes.
Now, we're going to hear a bit of music before we get on to the 90s and some of the work that you did. You talked earlier about E17. You worked with a lot of what you described there as manufactured pop and boy bands. We went through a very big boy band stage in the 90s, didn't we?
Yeah.
But we're going to listen to this because this is something you've been working on more recently. This is a song called Engaged. Tell us about this.
Yes.
Phil.
So I'm still working on producing and engineering and doing projects, because in the academic world that I've moved into, it's good to keep working in this industry and keep yourself on top of the technology. So this is a local guitarist from Stowmarket called Greg Fitch. Greg was on the course at West Suffolk College when I was teaching there about 10, 12 years ago. And he's a guitarist that we now use as a session guitarist with my current pop production team. So he came to myself and Julian Wiggins and said, I've had this song sitting around for a little while, guys, and I'd like to get it finished off as a full production. And it's quite a lot different to everything we've spoken about. It's a rock song, but it's quite commercial, and Greg had already recorded a lot of the guitar parts, and a lot of records are made like this now, where a start point will be made by the artist, because we've all got the technology to record in our bedrooms with a laptop and a few microphones, and then they'll often, as Greg did, get a bit stuck and think, well, where do I go from here? I need some other people to give me some input. So we re-recorded his vocals. We encouraged him to get a live drummer recorded onto the track, which we did, working remotely. That's the way a lot of records are made now.
Yeah, they're all kind of patched together, and people don't actually meet each other, do they?
That's right. No. We sent our files that we had at that point to the drummer. The drummer recorded himself, sent his files back to us.
Wow.
And we had a local bass player that Greg was friendly with, and and here we are. Greg's releasing it either in July or August, and this is its first airing.
Fantastic. I'm very honoured. This is Greg Fitch and the first play of Engaged.
In my mind had gone, person is who you see. All I know is in my mind, my demons keep haunting me all the time. If I can't find you, I'm meant to be. This empty person is who you see. All I know is in my mind, my demons keep haunting me all the time.
Greg Fitch and Engaged, its first play.
Brilliant.
Here on BBC Radio Suffolk, local songwriter, guitarist and vocalist as well. And that all produced, mixed by my guest here, Phil Harding,
Yes,
record producer.
co-produced by myself and Julian Wiggins, who also lives in Bury St Edmunds. Fantastic producer, musician, saxophone player. I'm not hearing him play sax on there, but he is a great sax player as well. And we've been delighted with how it's come out for Greg. And you know, at one point Greg said, "Oh, are you sure I should be singing this?" Because he's mainly a guitarist, and he's quite well known around the county as a guitarist. And we said, "Come on, Greg, this is your song, your story, your journey." And I think we got a great result from him.
Loving
vocally,
that,
yeah.
Absolutely loving that. Engaged, Greg Fitch, and that was its first ever play. I'm thrilled to do that. Now, before we heard that, I touched on the 90s. 1990s, we had a bit of a boy band invasion, and you've got a new book coming out soon called Pop Music Production, Manufactured Pop and Boy Bands of the 90s. Yourself and Mike Collins. This is your second book, so this takes us from the 80s into the 90s. You set up... Well, tell us what happened in the 90s. You set up the Strong Room. What was the Strong Room?
Yes, so the Strong Room already existed as a big studio, a bit like one might think about Abbey Road or something like that, but not quite as well known or as popular as that. So it already had 2 studios that were operating, and the people that owned it were very forward thinking, and they had spare space. And they came up with the idea of building sets of production suites for producers, remixers and songwriters and so on. And it was perfect for myself and Ian Curnow. We had formed a production partnership at PWL, and we were kind of the SAWB team, and we mixed for the Pet Shop Boys and many other acts while we were there. And in early 92, we decided it was time to move on from PWL, and we needed somewhere to set up as a base. So the Strong Room were perfect. They would supply a room about the size of the studio here, with a separate little vocal booth, be soundproofed, air conditioned. You'd bring your own equipment in, and I think we left PWL in the January, and by February we were making records for Simon Cowell.
Because as we got into the 90s, the power and the strength of Stock Aitken and Waterman started to wane a little bit, hadn't it?
Yeah. I mean,
that hit factory wasn't quite churning them out as much.
No, for some reason it didn't last the journey of crossing over from however we want to encapsulate the mad 80s and all of the city boom and the yuppies and all the rest of it.
The money that was about, when everything kind of crashed, that crashed as well, didn't it?
Yes. I mean, it wasn't as big a crash as 2008, but I think generally the media and the public just got fed up with a lot of this manufactured pop.
Was it too formulaic?
I think so. After 5 or 6 years, DJs and TV were looking for something different.
I mean, you could tell when you put the radio on, you were like, well, that's Stock Aitken and Waterman. I mean, they started to all sound...
It became a samey sound, you know. So 2 or 3 things happened. In the dance world, Acid House came along and became commercialised. New Kids on the Block were the first of the boy bands that arrived in the early 90s.
Starting to be a bit of an American invasion, and then the Backstreet Boys and that sort of thing.
That's it. But the reaction from the British record companies to New Kids on the Block was, oh, we've got to sign a British boy band. And amongst the first were Take That and E17.
And it was E17 that you worked with. Worked on Stay Another Day?
We did, yes. We were actually working with both acts for a little while, with Take That and with E17 in the early days. And the manager of E17, Tom Watkins, was very keen to manage us as a production team, myself and Ian Kerner. And he said to us, look, I'd like to manage you guys. I think I can kind of, be your Pete Waterman for the 90s, which is exactly what we were looking for. But you can't, I manage E17, you can't work with both acts.
Because there was that bit of there was rivalry between the two in the press, wasn't there?
At that point, that had already started. So we went with Tom Watkins, and he'd been the manager of the Pet Shop Boys and Bros, and we'd worked with the Pet Shop Boys a little bit. So we knew Tom, and we took that journey into the boy band.
Into the boy band, Boyzone, 911.
Yeah. Well, unbeknown to us, when that started, and it was very clear by the end of the 90s, you tend to get pigeonholed by the music industry, and I think it's the same in other creators. It's the same for actors. We played that role.
Play similar roles.
Play a similar role.
Yeah.
And the same goes when you're a production and songwriting team. You've had hits with E17, and Louis Walsh, who was managing Boyzone, was desperate to get us to work with Boyzone. And we only discovered that when we stopped after 3 albums working with E17. So we had a fantastic 3-year journey with them and with Tom, which peaked at the Christmas single "Stay Another Day,"
which gets played every Christmas.
Every Christmas it comes around, marvellous.
Do you get royalties from that?
Yes.
Do you?
not a huge amount, but it's
but every Christmas, little bonus,
and it keeps coming around. We didn't write the song, but
no. Is it true that the songwriters get the biggest slice of the pie?
When something is a catalogue item like that goes on and on, yes. So right now, the writers of Stay Another Day, which was one of the band members and 2 other songwriters, will be earning more per Christmas per year than the band members or people like myself and Ian. But luckily, producers do get paid now for performance. So in as much as songwriters are known for getting PRS income, we all see these PRS signs. That's Performing Rights Society, isn't it? Right.
And that's the licence you have to play music in shops and shopping centres or restaurants or whatever. And it's what we have. We have to, every song we play gets logged here, and it's so that people get paid every time we play something.
So there's an equivalent to that called PPL, which is less known, but you will see the stickers up in pubs and clubs, and you will be paying a PPL licence as well. I won't get too complicated here, but that basically pays the performers, the record companies, the session musicians, and the producers for
the work that they did.
For the work they did as it gets played. So that's it's not quite as much as the songwriters, but that has increased the future income for musicians and producers, which is fantastic.
What was the 90s like in terms of, did we just go from one lot of manufactured pop to another?
No, I don't think so, because along came Britpop as well.
Yeah, Blur and Oasis and all that.
Which is in its own way, well, that certainly wasn't manufactured. And in its own way, it was a kind of reaction like punk was against 70s rock, which, corporate rock or whatever you want to describe it. That was the reaction, going back to guitar-based rock pop music. That was the reaction to everything, I think, that had been going on from the mid-80s onwards.
It was an exciting time, the whole Blur versus Oasis, and we had the Charlatans, and we had Supergrass and all sorts.
There was great music around, and for people in the pop world like us, the shift had gone from the Ricks and Kylie was still around, but those type of acts, to the boy bands, and then along came the Spice Girls.
Yeah.
So you had boy bands and girl bands, and we spent virtually the whole of the 90s in that boy band world, because we'd become, like I was referring to a minute ago, pigeonholed by the music industry.
Yeah.
Oh, we're signing a boy band. Who can we take them to? Oh, well, Phil Hard and Ian Kerner. They've worked with E17 and Boyzone. Let's send 911 over there.
Let's send them to there. Yeah.
And then that kept happening with European acts as well. And somewhere in the late 90s, I just got a bit boy banded out.
And is that when you decided that you just had enough?
Certainly of that sort of manufactured pop boy band world.
I mean, you still produce now, so you've not had enough of that.
No,
doing that. But
still working out, but I nearly 20 years I'd been on, a high pressure treadmill that was beginning to take its toll. My children were here in Suffolk and Bury, ages sort of 11 and 12, and I felt if I was less time in London and more at home, that would be good for the children as well. And what had happened in 98 or 99, I was invited up to LIPA, which is the performing arts school that McCartney helped to fund in Liverpool. And I did my first academic workshop where I demonstrated a 911 track for the students, and how we went from a cassette demo from the songwriter to a finished record that charted, and realised by presenting that, and I did it over a couple of days in fact, this was useful information for students. I was quite nervous about it at the time. I'd never done something like that before, but it was in a studio that LIPA had arranged and built, and thought, this is good. I should be doing more of this.
So this is how your kind of lecturing career started, because you worked West Suffolk College as well, haven't you?
and I guest lecture all around the country at universities, and I'm co-chair of an organisation called JAMES, which stands for Joint Audio Media Education Services, and we're kind of a link between industry and education, and we provide a supportive industry accreditation to production and music technology courses. And that's what led me to what we're looking at here with the pop music production book. Leeds Beckett University, that I've got very good contacts with, said, Phil, if you'd like to do a PhD by portfolio, which means you include some of your work, we'd be very happy to support you. And my view on that was, well, I'd love to follow up the PWL 80s book with talking about the boy bands and so on of the 90s, and they allowed me to do my doctorate research PhD in manufactured pop of the 90s.
No better person to do it, really.
Which seems very strange, doesn't it? But that they would allow me to do that, and I've kind of, that's where I reflected on everything that's been going on. I was pushed into coming up with new knowledge and some theories around the work I did in the 80s and 90s, and I've brought that up to date in the book, making a suggestion to how young students and young people coming into the industry now could form that kind of pop songwriting and production team with a fairly specific set of members, sort of 4 members, and how to get a service industry model going and work in an entrepreneurship way. So the book is aimed at universities and colleges, but for those people that have read the 80s book, there is a lot of interesting reading about E17 and
all the stuff from the 90s
culture.
And the culture of it.
I write about the culture as well as all the technology.
And when's this out?
In August.
Out in August, lovely. Yes. So that's pop music production, manufactured pop and boy bands of the 90s. That will be out in August. Let's hear another piece of music, and then we'll come back and have another little chat, and then you've got something you want to do for us, haven't you? I've
brought my little ukulele in with me.
But before you get your ukulele out, tell me about 24 Club. We've got a track from them. Tell me what you want. This is an act that you're also working with currently.
Yes, and I'm also a member of the act. It goes all the way back to where we started our conversation in the 70s, and I was a bass player. I had been a keyboard player in bands, and this was while I was doing everything I described in learning the job at the Marquee, still in the evenings playing in bands and still having a bit of a desire to be a successful artist. And there was the band I was in the late 70s, early 80s, we lived at number 24 Glenton Close, and we were called the 24 Club because it was a bit of a party house. There was the 2 guitarists, myself, we had a drum kit. It was a cul-de-sac, so now I feel very sorry for our neighbours that were surrounding us. And what's happened is the other 2 guys moved to America a long time ago, but we've stayed in touch. We've carried on kind of creating in the background, and last year, Dave Dowell in Los Angeles decided, okay, let's get one new track that we had written and 3 unreleased tracks that we'd made and update them. And I think the one you're going to play from the 24 Club is the kind of newer one. So back in the early 80s, we were a post-punk power band, fast, fast stuff. And it's been a delight to sort of update that and make it available to people.
This is 24 Club and Tell Me What You Want. 24 Club and Tell Me What You Want here on BBC Radio Suffolk. I am with my In Conversation guest, Phil Harding. Normally I finish about 8 o'clock with an In Conversation guest, but do you know what? I didn't want to with you. It's my show, do what I like, it's my rules. I've let it overrun because I could talk to you all night. We've been through the 70s, 80s, 90s. Yeah. I love my music, otherwise I probably wouldn't be doing a job like this.
Of course,
and so it's been fascinating talking to you. But I bumped into you at the Suffolk show this week and you said, can I bring my ukulele? And I went, of course you can. What's got you into the ukulele, Phil?
Just for a laugh, Well, I joined, and I'm going to make sure I get this name right, the Ukulele Players of Bury St Edmunds. Mm-hmm. Most towns have got a ukulele club now. And my wife and I were over at Folk East a couple of years ago and walked into one of the tents that was a ukulele club from Beccles, I think. And we thought, this is good. Everyone's sitting around, nice and relaxed. Everyone's strumming and singing, no great pressure. So we went off to the stand where the chap running that session was set up, and made an instant purchase of 2 ukuleles, myself and my wife. But the great story for me is that my wife, by her own admission, is not very musical. Certainly, she's never played any instruments in her life. And here we are, a year after joining the Bury St Edmunds Club, and she's playing.
Fabulous.
And this is something that I would really recommend to anybody out there that, at whatever age you are, but especially if you've, if you reach the kind of age that I am now, and my wife. What a fantastic, because to take on guitar or piano. I mean, my wife's not even had any lessons. The guy that we bumped into at Folk East, he said, "Look, here's a 7 song sheets that are just 2 chords. You'll know all the songs. You learn those 2 chords, and you're playing. And
you're away."
And my understanding is most other ukulele clubs are welcoming, like the one in Bury. And we both joined together, and we're over a year later, and my wife's strumming away, singing away, which she loves doing anyway. And so I thought, well, just for a laugh, I'll bring in my ukulele tonight as well. I'm being quite brave because I've not done this live on radio before, and I'm a big Ipswich Town fan. And obviously, we've had a difficult season,
rough old season,
to say the least. So I thought, for all the Ipswich fans out there listening, I thought I'd do a little rendition of one of our favourite songs that we hear over at the ground.
All right. Well, before you do, Phil Harding, music producer, record producer, thank you so much for being my In Conversation guest. Take it away on your ukulele.
Georgy, thank you very much. It's been great. Right. Well, I never felt more like singing the blues when Ipswich win and Norwich lose. Oh, Ipswich, you got me singing the blues. Well, I never felt more like crying all night, 'cause everything's wrong and nothing ain't right with Ipswich. You got me singing the blues. The moon and stars no longer shine. The dream is gone I thought was mine. There's nothing left for me to do but cry over you. I never felt more like crying all night, 'cause everything's wrong and nothing ain't right with Ipswich. You got me singing the blues.
You got me singing the blues. You got me singing the blues.
Fabulous stuff. Phil Harding, my In Conversation guest. Thank you so much for joining me.